Welcome to Givers, Doers, and Thinkers. Today we talk to innovator and Socratic guide Jeff Sandefer about entrepreneurship, philanthropy, and education. Let's go. Givers, Doers, and Thinkers introduces listeners to the fascinating people and important ideas at the heart of American civil society. We speak with philanthropists, reformers, social entrepreneurs, nonprofit executives, religious leaders, scholars, journalists, and anyone else who will help us understand contemporary civil society's achievements and failures. My name is Jeremy Beer. Thank you for joining us. All right, thanks for joining us for this latest episode of Givers, Doers, and Thinkers. We're recording on January 23rd, 2024. I am in Phoenix, Arizona, and our guest today, Jeff Sandefer, is coming to us from beautiful Austin, Texas. Jeff did his undergraduate work at UT Austin and received his MBA from Harvard. He then founded Sandefer Offshore and Sandefer Capital Partners, the former generating $500 million in profits over a 5-year period, before going on to found the Acton School of Business and Acton Academy, about both of which institutions we shall hear more today. He's also an award-winning teacher, having delighted business students at UT Austin. I wish I had known about Jeff while I was at UT Austin, toiling away on my psychology PhD. Jeff has been a longtime board member of a number of institutions, including National Review, the Texas Public Policy Foundation, Philanthropy Roundtable, and the Harvard Business School. He belongs to the Mont Pelerin Society and is one of the youngest people ever elected to the Texas Business Hall of Fame. He and his wife, Laura, have 3 children, Tate, Charlie, and Sam. Jeff Sandefer, welcome.
Thank you, Jeremy. Great to be here.
Thanks for your time today. Did I get the names of the kids right?
Absolutely. Right on.
You got to get those names and the wife's name right, and then everything else, I'm sure. Close enough. It will be interesting to see if I can get a Socratic guide to actually submit to questioning today. I suppose that's a...
What do you think?
Exactly. I know how hard it was with Socrates himself, so we'll do our best. You went to UT, then Harvard, got your MBA, but you had already started a business at the age of 16. What was that about? How did that come into being?
Well, I had been working in the oil field for 2 summers as a roustabout, which is having spent time in Texas, you may know, is kind of the worst, dirtiest job you can do. And I was going to spend a 3rd summer if I didn't find another idea. So I hired the football coaches at our high school, and they hired my friends, their players. And we went out and we painted the big silver oil tanks on the side of the road. And what I had noticed working the summers before is that the minimum wage laborers, and at those days we were making $2.65 an hour.
Princely.
Wasted a lot of time. So I decided to pay my guys by the tank painted, and they used their pickup trucks instead of company equipment. And instead of painting 1 tank battery every 3 days, we painted 3 tank batteries a day. And for that 9-fold increase in productivity meant that we had 80% profit margins, charging 2/3 the price of our competitors. So that was my first business, and it was totally done to get out of the hot sun. And it worked.
Why do you think you sort of had a feel for incentives early on and the power of incentives?
You know, that's a good question. What I remember best is not enjoying. It wasn't just the hard work, because I'd done hard work, but the guys I was with were, they were making minimum wage, and not everybody makes minimum wage is like this, but they wanted to talk more about sex and drugs and things I wasn't really very interested in. And so I think it was as much desperation as anything. And that I saw that, and I felt the same way too. If I'm only getting paid by the hour, why not work as many hours as you can and work slowly? So it probably came from my own sloth more than anything.
I sort of doubt that, but it's ironic to think that sloth could be the prod to a successful entrepreneurship. So then you went in, you had huge success and energy. Was it that work in the oil field that prepared you to take that path, or what was the preparation for that?
Well, at the time, I thought it was my brilliance. I later understood that I'd grown up, crawling over oil maps and sat at the kitchen table listening to oil men make deals. So it really was in my blood. And, when I came out of school at Harvard, I really wanted to do something on my own. And so there was just a momentary time in the Gulf of Mexico taking farm outs or subleases from major oil companies. There was just this brief moment in time. And I had been in school during the energy bust. So I had missed during the energy boom. So I missed the boom, came out in the bust, and, had a great strategy. We got lucky. Prices went up, and it was a good ride. But at age 28, I had more money than I could ever spend because I don't spend very much. And I had to figure out what to do next.
There had to be something, though, about risk tolerance and a high risk tolerance on your part that led to that success. Or am I wrong in just guessing that was the case?
No, I'm actually very risk averse. In fact, extremely risk averse. My old friend and former professor Amar Bidet says the one thing that sets entrepreneurs apart from others, and it's not risk taking, certainly not good looks. But he said it's a tolerance for ambiguity. And the way Amar describes that is you're standing there and you see the mountain and you say, I know that's the mountain. That's where we're headed. And you say it confidently because you're sure and people follow you. But as soon as you take the first step, you say, that's probably the wrong mountain. So I'm going to be looking for data and experiments that can tell me I need to change course slightly. And you're not lying because you both at the moment are sure that's the right mountain and also sure that you're wrong about being sure and it's the wrong mountain. And so it's that tolerance and being able to hold those two opposing ideas in your mind and be able to hold ambiguity in your mind that makes for entrepreneurs. And I think I do have a tolerance for ambiguity.
That's interesting that you say it's not really risk taking. Is there, though, I think what's implied in what you just said is there's sort of a prejudice for action?
Yes. Yeah. I think there's definitely.
I wonder if there's maybe this will get us to the Acton School of Business idea, but is there a tension? Oftentimes I feel a tension between more intuitive entrepreneur types and more highly trained MBA types in terms of how much data and analysis has to be done before taking action.
Oh, yeah. I don't think most good business ideas are on a sheet of paper and one piece of paper, and they work out because they work out. In other words, it's a trial and error process. And the most dangerous thing for an entrepreneur is their second venture, because you forget how lucky you were on the first one and you begin to think you made it happen. And so you think you can make it happen on the second one. So I just think it's a matter of trial and error. Now, you can set up the bets in such a way that they're in your favor and they're asymmetric, that there's more payoff than risk, all sorts of ways to do that. But I think at the end of the day, you're right. It's a bias towards action and experimentation and, frankly, not worrying about being wrong. Mistakes are terrible. People that say it's great to make mistakes, that's nonsense. It's terrible. They're just necessary. They're just necessary.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Not great, but necessary, like pain in a life.
And I don't even think, by the way, it's humility, because I didn't have that. I think it's just a willingness, to kind of get hit in the face and get back up. And we'll talk about Acton Academy later, but in the hero's journey, the hero doesn't always win, and they're certainly not a celebrity, but heroes always get back up. And so, that's entrepreneurs, the real ones, always get back up.
So it was at Harvard you discovered the Socratic method. Is that right? And why was that so powerful for you?
Yes, I did discover it there. I learned that putting yourself in the shoes of a protagonist facing a complex business idea, and these Harvard cases that you discussed are 10 to 100 pages long. You'll prepare them for 8 to 10 to 12 hours each. And then you show up in class and the professor says, Jeremy, you're Steve Belkin. What would you do and why? And you make your case and you debate and you fight and you listen and you apply frameworks. And you're in essence going through that trial and error process. And often the professor will flip and, change the game on you in mid stride. And so to the best you can, you're actually in the shoes making decisions. It's like flying a flight simulator. You're doing that best you can off of a story and a piece of paper. But you can see lots of patterns. And lots of patterns very, very quickly. And those patterns, just like the stories in the Bible or Shakespeare, or any mental model are really powerful. And so the case method, the Socratic method, is a great way to learn by asking questions and to learn that the smartest person is the quietest one in the room who just asks a few questions and listens. I'm still learning that lesson every day, but that's the smartest guy in the room.
So essentially, too, though, it was a way of gaining more experience more quickly.
Yeah,
more second and third.
It is experience. I agree with you, but it's more pattern recognition, more repetitions, and having to defend your thoughts too and your positions.
So, what was the impetus behind the Acton School of Business? I think at that point you had started a couple of companies. You had taught at UT Austin. Is that correct? You got your MBA at Harvard.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, I had been teaching at UT Austin. And I was telling a story just this weekend, as a matter of fact. I realized that 7 of us were teaching 25% or more of all the credit hours in the second year of the school. As 17 of us as adjuncts, like we were being paid $1,000 a class. And I did the math, and it occurred to me that 17 of us teaching full time could teach the entire school, but the entire school had 141 faculty members. So I made the mistake of doing that math and logic out loud, sitting in front of an academic dean. And when I said that, I saw the look on his face, and I thought, "Oh no, we're doomed," because I wasn't being cheeky, I was capable of that, but I was just thinking out loud. But I knew then that we were doomed. And so, sure enough, even though we had the most powerful, most successful, popular program on campus, our classes were oversubscribed 3-to-1. We built the program ourselves from scratch. We were either fired or we quit, and there's truth in both of those stories. And we decided, Jeremy, that we would go across the street and teach a class for free, because half of the business school students, and as you well know, the UT Business School is a big place, had come for our program, and now the program just left. We thought, well, gosh, nobody will show up for this class. There's no credit. It'll be really hard, but at least we will have done our part, right? And so we had this class. The first day, 130 people showed up, including students and faculty that drove from Rice University, from Baylor, from Texas A&M. We realized we had this following. And so that was the start of the Acton School of Business. We said, gosh, well, we've always said the second year of business school is a waste of time. Maybe we can just teach a 1-year program. And we were the second 1-year MBA program in the world. And we started out in a rented space. And the first year, the Princeton Review named us as our MBAs as the most competitive business school students in the United States, and our faculty the third best in the United States. So we were off and running with the Acton School of Business. And
it seems to be externally most famous for the 100-hour week.
Yeah. Well, we favored Navy SEALs, the Special Forces, fighter pilots, Olympic athletes, really tough, aspiring entrepreneurs. We had all extremely successful business people teaching, all by the Socratic method. So we never uttered a declarative sentence on campus. And, the students worked very, very hard. So yeah, the 100-hour work weeks were real. It was at least 100 hours.
Is business, should someone do something else before they get an MBA? Not a business undergraduate degree.
Yeah, I definitely think experience is best before going to get an MBA. I wouldn't recommend an MBA that wasn't a case method school, and there's only a handful of those. University of Virginia, Darden, INSEAD in Europe, Harvard Business School is kind of the grandfather of them all. Tuck School at Dartmouth, and that's about it. And so I just don't think the learning at MBA programs is worth very much beyond that. And it's certainly not at the undergraduate level. So I think business is best learned by doing it. And it can be supplemented some by the right kind of case school.
Because that's like doing it in a way. At least it gives you the pattern.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and we can talk about this more later, but I think it's a reflection of the collapse of the modern university.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the modern university is doomed, absolutely doomed. Not for ideological reasons, by the way, for practical reasons. I just don't think it delivers any value, and I think Americans are waking up to that. So,
elaborate on that. You put forward at one point the sort of seven
breakthrough solutions for higher education reform.
Yeah. Is that still something you believe in or and are advocating for?
I'm not advocating for it anymore because I learned that my place is not fighting in the state house against wrongs. But those breakthrough solutions for which Texas and Governor Perry were kind of the leaders of higher ed reform were so simple that I couldn't believe anyone was offended by them. I mean, it said we should measure what we do. We should reward people for doing it. We should split things out and measure them separately so we know where the money's going. I mean, it was, we should reform accreditation so students can vote with the dollars, with their feet. They were the most simple, non-controversial things in the world. And yet for that effort on the day that UT President Bill Powers was fired because he was caught in a very illegal admissions scandal, someone fired a high-powered rifle into one of our schools. I got death threats. So messing with higher education does not turn out to be a really smart thing to do.
That's wild. Elaborate on why it's doomed and not for ideological reasons.
Well, I just don't think it adds any value. I mean, our sons, Charlie and Sam, are in college now. Our daughter Tate graduated a few years ago, and they are at prestigious universities, difficult degrees. Charlie's about to go become a Marine fighter pilot with the Marines as soon as he graduates. Our two sons have not learned a single thing in college, and our daughter didn't either. Not one valuable thing. I mean, the things they do in college, even like in engineering degrees, are things we did in middle school. So I just don't think there's much learning that's going on.
I certainly wouldn't be the one to disagree with you on that, but yet your kids went to those colleges. So somehow is it just because that's the only way to get the credential necessary to move on to the next career?
No. The biggest mistake I've ever made as a parent, and I've made a lot of mistakes, I should have offered them the money and the choice to take the money or go to school. And I knew at the time I should do that. And we could afford it. But I, instead of doing that, which I should have done, I just thought, what the heck? I mean, it's okay for them to go. And if I'd offered the money, they would have taken the money and probably hacked a degree at somewhere, sometime if they needed it. Charlie needed one for the Marines, but he could have hacked one. But it's been a waste of 4 years of their lives. They've had fun. They've met some interesting people. That's not worth $400,000 or $500,000, and much less 4 years of their lives that they could have been doing something much, much more productive.
Well, we will shift from higher ed to K through 12 ed when we come back from the break and continue talking to entrepreneur Jeff Sandefer, and we'll be right back.
Hey folks, I'm Jack Fowler, the author of Civil Thoughts. That's the free weekly email newsletter for the Center for Civil Society at AmPhil, where we try to strengthen civil society. Civil Thoughts gives you a dozen plus recommended readings. Here's a link. Here's an excerpt of important articles and essays that I've come across in the previous week. I think anyone who's intelligent, dear intelligent American, that you will like it. So how do you get Civil Thoughts? Well, you go to civilthoughts.com, sign up. Trust me, it's totally free, risk-free. We're not selling your name to anybody. You'll enjoy it. civilthoughts.com.
All right, we are back. We're speaking with entrepreneur Jeff Sandefer about philanthropy, entrepreneurship, education. We're kind of mixing everything together here. Let's talk about Acton Academy. That I think you founded that after the Acton School of Business, correct?
Well, mostly correct. Okay. To give credit where credit is due, my wife founded it.
I'm sorry, Laura.
Yeah, Laura has been nice enough to give me co-founding naming privileges, which I don't deserve because she actually started it. But yeah, it's been a great ride. I've been very involved. I was a full-time middle school, and we call it Launchpad, but high school teacher for 13 years in the trenches. So I put my time in. But she really gets credit for starting it.
So Acton Academy now has more than 300 locations worldwide. At least that's what I read somewhere. Does
That's
that sound
correct.
right?
And 18,000 auditions from parent entrepreneurs who want to start a school. So there's obviously a lot of demand out there.
Yeah. So what was the gap that in the educational landscape that Laura saw, I guess, that called for this new kind of school?
Well, we didn't really see a gap in the educational landscape because we didn't care much about that. What happened was our boys were in Montessori school. They were in preschool, and it was time to transfer them to a traditional school. So I went to see the very best teacher in the very best private middle school where our daughter was going in Austin. And I asked him, when should we move the boys? And he said, as soon as possible. I was kind of taken aback because he almost snapped it at me. I said, really? Why? And he said, well, because when they've had that kind of freedom, and then they're going to be chained to a desk and lectured to for 8 hours a day, they won't like it. And before I could think of anything, I just said, well, I don't blame them. I was just kind of stunned. And this great teacher, he's a very tall man, looked down and for the longest time didn't say anything. And I thought I had offended him. And he looked up and he shook his head and he had tears in his eyes. And he said, very softly, I don't either. And I went home that day and told Laura, we're done. I mean, the best teacher, the best school just said, don't put your boys in school. And I don't know if we're going to start a school or we're going to homeschool, but they're not going to school. Not going to do it. And so that was the start of Acton Academy.
Talk about the model that you employ at Acton Academy. It has these Montessori elements, but it's much more than that.
It does. And like I mentioned earlier about trial and error, it really was built off of a blank sheet of paper. And so we were lucky at those days. That's when Khan Academy was just getting started and all the great adaptive learning programs for core skills. And so we started with, a bare little house in West Austin with a round circle green carpet, a handful of pencils, and some books, and Chromebooks. Very expensive inexpensive laptops. And we just experimented over and over and over again. And then that became Acton Academy. So it was really one step at a time. We had no intention, by the way, of starting a second one. And once the model was kind of going, we had one of the top experts in the country come and look at it. And she and her husband, who was at that point CEO or CFO of Hawaiian Airlines, were changing planes to go home to Hawaii from at DFW Airport. We got a text. We decided we have to move our family to Austin if you'll accept us. And so that gave us, some idea that we were doing something right. And then one of my former students, who's a terrific guy, Juan Bonifaci in Guatemala, came and saw it. And he said, I have to have this for my children. Can you give me the model? And gosh, at best, I had a pile of mimeographed pieces of paper and a few internet connections, links. And I sent that to him. And 6 months later, Juan's Acton was better than ours. And then Danny decided that she and Russ is one of the world experts in AI. Back then he was working with Wolfram Alpha. And he got a great gig in Manhattan Beach, in Venice Beach, California. And she said, I'm not moving if we can't start an Acton. So she started one. 6 months later, we were learning more from her. And we thought, we'll have 10 of these. We'll experiment. We'll get entrepreneurial people like us. We'll have 10 so we can learn faster. And all of a sudden, 10 became 20, became 40, and then now 18,000 auditions. Because once you see the learner-driven model kind of in real life, you can't unsee it. You just can't unsee it. And it's a testament to all the learners who built it, all the owners around the world, and a lot of trial and error.
Talk about the learner-driven model and what its key elements are. Is this where the hero's journey idea comes in?
It is. And for this to make much sense, you almost have to get rid of the idea of school altogether. I mean, if you start trying to make this a school, it will complicate understanding it. It's somewhat like an old-fashioned neighborhood where you do the chores at home and then you went out and played with your friends in the neighborhood and you played pickup football or something and you learned a lot of lessons from that. It's somewhat like a county fair where you might go and your parents, let you go inside and they know you're safe kind of once you're in the fair. but you're free to roam with friends and play games of chance and games of skill and see new worlds on the midway and, maybe even exhibit a prize hog. I mean, it's a lot like that. And then at the upper levels, it's a lot like working at a healthy Google. I mean, people are actually doing real world work. And, we start apprenticeships at 10 or 11 years old. And so they're out pursuing what we call the next great adventure or the hero's journey at a very young age. And it's all built around people finding a calling that will change the world. And, the trick we say is, what we say is that only geniuses are allowed at Acton Academy, but we accept everyone who applies. And that sounds like an oxymoron until you realize we think every child is a genius, not 180 IQ, but having some incredible skill. And, the best plumber in Austin is having a better life than the average Ivy League grad. So we're all about people finding their place in the world and, fighting their way to it in community to add value.
One of the principles of Acton Academy is a belief in economic, political, and religious freedom. How does that play out in the everyday life of these schools?
Well, it plays out. It starts with the learners. In fact, we don't even use the word student, by the way, because there's no hierarchy. We're very careful that we never say kids. It's okay to say kids about your own children, but we really, that's a diminutive term. So the learners, and one of the first things they do is they build a tribe and create a contract. And they sign that contract under a picture of the Declaration of Independence with all the solemnity that the founding fathers would have had. I mean, it's a very sacred contract. That begins to govern the tribe. Over time, they'll have an economic system where you earn hero bucks and you either spend them on things, or if you violate your promises, you can have them taken away as a fine. And through that, they experiment with tyranny, with chaos and anarchy, with democratic republics. They're really building their own communities. And by the end, we'll have in our mature campuses 100 to 130 learners and only 2 adults. That includes janitorial, accounting, web services, anything you can name, because the learners learn from each other and from the real world. And so we've got costs in some cases down to $1,000 per learner per year. At our campus, the learners advance 2 to 3 grade levels, no matter what IQ they came in with. And very quickly, that wasn't even important because they were good enough. I mean, academics were fine. They were great, but nobody cared because the important stuff wasn't captured on a test.
Obviously, this is a very unique model, and people are experimenting with many different educational models, some very, very different than this one right now. It's sort of a time of ferment. To zoom out, what advice do you have for educational entrepreneurs who want to start or maybe scale a new school?
I really don't have any. It's funny. We're not educational reformers, and in fact, we just serve families. So I agree with you. There are a lot of great models. We're just one of them, and ours changes all the time. We have a forum where all the owners and the guides, and it's about 1,000 people, are constantly pitching ideas in an organized way and experiments. And our model's morphing all the time. I mean, it's staying true to the principles and the promises we made, but it's getting better all the time. And so I think our model, I bet we've discovered, I used to say 15%. I think we're probably up to 25% of the model has been discovered. And we're still discovering the last 75%. So
I think that's a piece of advice, though, right? Isn't it? To this sort of like this creating a feedback loop that allows your models to continuous improvement would be the sort of, jargony word we'd want to use here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and particularly in our case, I mean, you're just continuing to learn and do new things. I mean, I don't think the old models work very well. And I'll tell you, I think it's because they're about learn to know. They really still are about memorizing and regurgitating for a test primarily. And our model is learn to learn, which really means what are the mental models, the recipes, the algorithms that will apply within a certain domain. Like Charlie Munger says, don't get out of your lane. So you're going to learn the things in a domain or an area that apply for you. Learn to do. I'm going to put those into action. Action requires courage. in this hero's journey, the idea is to step across the threshold and then learn to be. The idea that on a hero's journey, I am after the grail, but the real thing isn't whether the hero reaches the grail or not, but how the hero changes in the process. So it's a process of becoming the person that God meant you to be if you're religious, or you were meant to be if you were a humanist. It doesn't really matter. That you're becoming who you were meant to be is to learn to be. I think that's how the world really works. I think science and chaos theory and emergent behavior, we're seeing that the real science, that the old science, even properly applied, only applies to a limited set of questions. And this new emergent behavior, which is a lot more complexity. Stephen Wolfram writes about it a lot when he talks about complex, computational irreducibility. There are just some things you have to play the game to find out what's going to happen. And I think life is like that. I just don't. That's why I'm not worried about AI. It's life is too complex, and humans have to make the decisions. So this is a game of complexity, of emergent behavior, of learning as you go after the grail in community to do what you were meant to be.
Do you use a language of virtue in these schools as a way of talking about growing in the qualities that describe who you were meant to be, or no?
No, I think the answer is no in the way you mean it. So we never talk about to be virtuous, but every decision and every launch and every Socratic question is by definition a moral decision. Unless you're just deciding whether you want chocolate or vanilla ice cream. And even then I could argue, beauty or discernment is a virtue, but let's just say flavors of ice cream don't count. Every other decision, you're having to decide how to spend your time, what matters, trade off the few versus the many, today versus tomorrow. And, at Acton Academy, they are trying, let's be utilitarians for a while. Let's try justice, fairness. People talk a lot about DEI and justice. Well, there is a tremendous amount of injustice in the world. The question is, what are we going to do about it? The question isn't, is there injustice? Of course there is. Tom Sowell always says, well, compared to what, right? I mean, how's this model compared to what? But so they are making ethical and moral decisions all the time. We're never telling them how to make those. I'll give you an example of a launch. A launch is often only 2 minutes, but it sets up, and I'll let you answer this question. We'll see what you would do. It sets up about a 15-minute discussion. So you're Marcus Luttrell, Navy SEAL. You're in charge. You just landed with your 3 buddies on Operation Red Wing on the top of a mountain in Pakistan. A young goat herder of age 13 wanders up with his herd. Your decision is, do you kill him, which will be a war crime, or do you let him go knowing that he will alert the Taliban and you and all of your friends will be killed? So, Jeremy, what would you do and why?
Do you have a third option to go back in time and not join the Navy SEALs and have to face these ethical dilemmas?
Oh, you're there. What would you do?
Yeah, this reminds me of philosophy class, sort of like the train is going down the track. You switch it.
Yeah,
kill everybody.
Except Marcus is a friend. Marcus is a friend of mine, and
this happened.
He was there, right?
Yeah.
What would you do?
Yeah, well, I mean, and there's no like tie the goat herd up and delay him at least for a while option. No. Just kill or go on.
No, they're going to come looking for him.
You can't kill him.
Yeah, Marcus doesn't kill him, and his 3 best friends die, and he almost dies. But we could, as you understand, we could unpack that and work for a long time. Every decision at Acton Academy, every question is about something that has or will matter in their lives, either in the studio today or in the future. And so that's the way we come to virtue, is by exploring action and courage in real life situations and then deciding and arguing about what would be best.
That's fascinating. Let me pivot here away from Acton Academy and toward sort of the nonprofit sphere, where you've also had a lot of experience. You recently, I think you won the William E. Simon Prize recently from the Roundtable.
Yes. As much as I like the Simon family and the DeVos family, we don't like
I'm
winning
sorry
prizes. Yes,
that was inflicted on you.
Yeah. We love them. We're not big on prizes, but we love them.
But it points to sort of your very active role as a philanthropist, if I can put it that way. A question I always have for people like you come from the business world, entrepreneurs in particular, is when you started moving into nonprofit leadership roles, board roles, and so forth, what did you find that you could take and what applied from your background as an entrepreneur, and kind of what didn't? Where was the domain different enough? They're like, oh, this is actually different. I need to learn different things over here.
So I don't believe the lessons of entrepreneurship apply to philanthropy at all. I believe probably corporate CEOs could do philanthropy. I define philanthropy as the systematic improvement of mankind. It's what, in my mind, people try to do at Davos. We're smarter than everybody else. We're going to figure it out. We're going to help the poor people. Last I checked, human nature hasn't changed since the Bible. I mean, everything I can read that's ancient, it doesn't seem to change at all. I like to think of charity, which is providing love or comfort to, or tough love to someone you care about or yourself. And now the problem with charity is it's really hard to scale. But I'm only interested.
Why people prefer philanthropy.
Philanthropy is very easy to scale, right? And in fact, people will tell you how smart you are. Now, I'm not knocking philanthropists. It's really hard. And there are philanthropists who've done some good, but I think about 90% of philanthropic money does harm. Not as wasted. It actually does harm because it doesn't have the right spirit to it. So long answer is that I think for charity, entrepreneurs can be very effective. I have one of my former students called me about a week ago, and he's selling his company for several $100 million. He was my very first class at UT. And he said he was thinking about doing philanthropy. So I sent him a lot of readings, William Easterly, White Man's Burden, Acton Institute, no relation to Acton Academy, but their Poverty Inc. film, a lot of readings. And he called me back and he said, "You saved my life. I was so depressed that I was going to have to be handing out money to people in line. And this is just like business. You have a customer, they have to pay something. I mean, right? Alcoholics Anonymous is free, but you have to give up drinking. It's really expensive if you like to drink." But he said, all I have to do is treat people with, serve them as customers and learn how to scale. And I can pick a problem and I can help people, not solve it, right? He didn't use those words. He knew better than that. I can actually help somebody. So I think that's where entrepreneurial talent came in. It's very hard because you're trying to change people. You're trying to transform people. Well, you're not transforming. They're transforming themselves, but you're setting up something where they can transform themselves. And that's typically really hard to do with adults. Very, very hard.
I think your point of view, as listeners of the podcast will know, is one that I actually share quite deeply, but it's pretty rare. I think it's especially rare among people who come from the business world. I mean, I think, do you find that your point of view here is pretty rare, a kind of humility in the face of solving large problems, scaling up solutions?
I don't know. It's not, I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I will know that I think back to a conversation I had with Bernie Marcus one day. I got a phone call from Curtis Meadows, who is the Meadows Family Foundation. His son, John's, one of my dear friends, was a student. And Curtis said, "Would you go see this Bernie Marcus guy?" I had no idea who Bernie was. He turns out he's the billionaire founder of Home Depot, one of the founders. So I fly out to see Bernie and spend the day with him in Florida. By the way, he lives in a very small, nondescript house, just like Buffett or Charles Koch, or, it's just a very normal place. And he wants to build 100 Acton MBAs. So I explained to Bernie that if that were possible, I would have built 100. I had the resources to do that. I just didn't know how. But at the end of that day, Bernie said to me, "Do you mind if I give you some advice, if an old man gives you some advice?" And I said, "No, I'd be honored." And he said, "I have last year I built the Atlanta Aquarium. I spent $250 million. And he was quick to point out, I designed it, I built it, I staffed it, and I fixed it so the city of Atlanta could not screw it up. And then I gave him the keys. He said, unfortunately, at the end of the year, I was worth more money than I was at the beginning. And every night I go to bed scared to death I'm going to die, and someone's going to use this money and hurt someone with it. And then he said, because I was still in business at the time, every dollar you make from now on is going to be a curse to you, not a blessing. And on the plane home that night, that was ringing in my ears, and I decided I'm going to sell everything. I'm done. He's exactly right. And he's 100% right that, more money will not solve any of my problems or anyone else's. And I began like the 12-month period of just selling everything. So, Bernie has that kind of humility. David Weekley, the Weekley Foundation has that kind of humility. Phil Anschutz does. Charles Koch does. So there are people that have it. The DeVos family and the Simon family have it. And I'm sure those are more right of center. I'm sure there are people on the left of center that have that kind of humility. But then it's not just humility, it's reality. I'm not a humble guy. Mine's just, I know I've seen enough of how the world works. It's really hard to do.
Let me ask you one last question. There's so much I want to ask you on the path you were just taking us down, but I need to wrap it up. That's really fascinating. And maybe this will be related, maybe it won't be, but you've served on a number of boards. You've seen how these things work. What drove you most nuts about nonprofit organizations when you were like serving in those board roles? You don't have to speak about any of those particular organizations, of course, but what do nonprofits do that drive you the most bananas? Well,
I'll give you the flavor of it with a story. So, I don't mind, saying it as it is. I was asked to be on the board of an Austin art museum. Now, I have the artistic taste of a caveman. Laura has beautiful taste, loves the arts. She used to run a fame-like arts program in Oklahoma City, so she's terrific. Me, zero. And I tell these people, I don't even like the arts. I'm the you want Homer Simpson before you want me. And they said, no, you're known for being the guy on the board who tells the truth, and we need some truth. I said, okay. I went to the first meeting, and I said, what's the mission statement? And they said that people, that Anglos, Blacks, and Hispanics will come together to see the arts. And I said, yeah, and your museum is in West Austin, which for all its liberal values is one of the most racially segregated places in Texas. And I said, people of color don't go to where your art museum is. They wouldn't. It's in a pocket of town where, they wouldn't feel welcome. So if you ever counted how many people of color come to your museum, I don't care what your mission is. That's up to you, but we should measure it. A week later, I got a call that said, we've rethought you being on the board. And I was asked to leave. I wasn't even unkind the way I just said. I said, you either change your mission statement or you ought to measure and do what you're saying, right? And so I don't care if it's a for-profit board or a not-for-profit board. I don't like that kind of thing. I don't like universities saying they're for teaching students instead of that, feather bedding the faculty. I don't like. So people they should do what they say. That bothers me wherever it shows. But I've seen it anywhere where there's not direct accountability and skin in the game. Whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit.
I wouldn't expect anything less from a kid who grew up in the West Texas oil fields, presumably. Prioritize honesty and candor in community.
Oh, I've broken that rule plenty, believe me. So, I paid for it every time, but not that I'm not holier than thou. I've broken that rule plenty of times.
Well, Jeff Sandefer, thanks so much for joining us today. People can find out about Acton Academy at actonacademy.org. Any place else you would send people for Sandefer-related things?
Well, my favorite thing that we do is the Children's Business Fair, which you can Google at actonchildrensbusinessfair.org or just Children's Business Fair to pop on Google. It is a place where young people can start a business for a day. You can do it in your front yard with just 7 tables. We now have 1,800 fairs serving about 50,000 learners, and it's the most fun thing we do. In fact, it's even more powerful than Acton Academy. So if you have a young child that's an entrepreneur or a grandchild, go start a children's business fair because they're a blast. It has a 9.9 lifetime customer satisfaction rating. You just can't screw them up. They're too much fun.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's great. Appreciate it, Jeff Sandefer, your time, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. If you enjoyed it, we invite you to subscribe and or rate and review this discussion on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to our podcasts. And have a guest you'd like to hear from? Send your request to our producer, Katie Janis, at kjanis@amphil.com. That's KJANUS@amphil.com.